Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe brighter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
Nobody told Danny Reeves that the jungle on Varith could sweat. That was the only word for it. The trees oozed warm moisture from their bark. The ground squelched under every step, and the air itself felt like breathing through a wet towel. 30 cadets from 12 different species pushed through the undergrowth in a loose formation, scanning devices in hand, pretending this was just another navigation drill. Danny wiped his forehead with his sleeve and glanced at Raleigh, who was struggling beside him. She was a Felwyn, small, covered in sleek brown fur, with enormous dark eyes that made her look permanently worried. Right now, she looked more worried than usual. "I hate this moon," Raleigh whispered. "You hate every moon," Danny said, "because every moon is terrible." Behind them, Sur, a broad Canary cadet built like a wall of gray-green scales, pushed through a vine curtain without slowing down. He did not speak much. When he did, it was usually to tell someone they were being slow. "Move," Sur said. They moved. Instructor Golan led the group from the front, his four silver arms holding a scanner, a communicator, a sidearm, and a canteen simultaneously. He was Mirati, tall and thin as a wire, and he ran training drills like a machine that had never heard of the word rest. Everything was normal until Golan stopped walking. All four of his arms went still at the same time. Danny had never seen that before. Golan raised the communicator to his ear, listened for 5 seconds, and then his silver skin turned shade Danny could only describe as gray. "Drill is canceled," Golan said. His voice was flat and tight. Everyone turned north. Full pace to the extraction shuttles. Do not stop for anything. A Felwyn cadet near the front raised her hand. "Sir, what is a Varadi matriarch has been detected 4 kilometers south of our position and is moving this direction. We leave now." The reaction was immediate. Half the cadets bolted. The other half froze, which was somehow worse. Raleigh grabbed Danny's arm so hard he felt her claws through his sleeve. "Danny, we need to go. Right now." "What is a Varadi?" Danny asked, because he was from Earth and had only been in the Galactic Union for 9 months, and nobody had covered this in orientation. Raleigh pulled him forward as she talked, her voice shaking. 6 legs, armored, size of a shuttle, classified as a galactic-level threat. One matriarch killed an entire military patrol on Deneth 4. They do not negotiate. They do not warn. They just kill. Danny ran. Everyone ran. The jungle blurred into green and brown streaks as 30 cadets crashed through the undergrowth with all the grace of a stampede. Golan kept barking directions over the comm, his voice getting tighter with every update. Then Danny heard it. Not the matriarch. Not a roar or a crash or the sound of something enormous breaking through trees. It was small, high-pitched, a series of short, desperate cries coming from somewhere below and to his left that he slowed. Raleigh did not notice at first. She made it 10 meters ahead before she turned and saw Danny standing still, his head tilted, listening. "Danny, no. Do you hear that? I hear my own heartbeat, and that is all I want to hear. Come on." Danny stepped off the trail. He pushed through a tangle of thick roots that rose out of the ground like fingers and knelt beside a hollow beneath the base of an enormous tree. The cries were louder here. Tiny, frantic, and full of fear, he leaned down and looked inside. 4 small creatures lay pressed together in the dark. They were the size of dogs, with 6 stubby legs each, soft plating along their backs that had not yet hardened, and wide, wet eyes that caught the dim light. Their mouths opened and closed, making those high broken sounds over and over. Cubs. Baby Varadi. They were cold. He could see them shivering. Their skin was dull where it should have been bright. One of them was barely moving at all. Raleigh appeared behind him. She looked into the hollow, and every hair on her body stood straight up. "Those are Varadi cubs. Danny, those are Varadi cubs. They are dying," Danny said quietly. "Their mother is the thing we are running from. They are still dying." Golan's voice crackled over the communicator, demanding to know why 2 signals had stopped moving. Danny looked at the device on his wrist. He looked at the cubs. The smallest one opened its mouth and made a sound that was not a cry anymore. It was a whisper, Danny reached down slowly and picked it up. It flinched in his hands, then pressed against his chest, seeking warmth, and went quiet. "Danny," Raleigh said. Her voice was barely a sound. "If the matriarch finds you here with her cubs, she will tear you apart." "Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Every record says definitely." Danny picked up a second cub and held both of them against his body. He unzipped his jacket and wrapped it around them. The other two cubs crawled toward his knees. Drawn by the warmth, he switched off his communicator. Raleigh stared at him with those enormous eyes, and Danny could see every emotion cross her face at once. Terror, disbelief, frustration, and something else underneath all of it. Something that looked like the smallest, most frightened sliver of admiration. "You are insane," she said. "Probably," Danny said. He sat down in the dirt beside the hollow. Variety cubs pressed against him and did not move. Somewhere in the jungle, the ground began to shake. The shaking came in waves, each one heavier than the last, each one closer. Danny felt it through the ground, up through his legs, into his ribs. The cubs felt it too. They stopped whimpering and pressed harder against him, their tiny claws digging into his shirt. They knew what was coming. Raleigh had not left. She stood behind a root wall, both hands over her mouth, her entire body trembling so badly that the leaves around her shook with her. Danny had told her to go. Twice. She had refused both times, though he was fairly certain she had stopped breathing. The trees to the south cracked. Not bent, cracked. The sound was like bones snapping, one after another, as something enormous pushed through the jungle without slowing down. Danny saw a trunk the width of a car fold sideways and crash to the ground 30 meters away. And then he saw her. The Variety matriarch stepped into the clearing. She was bigger than any creature Danny had ever seen. 6 legs, each one thick as a support beam, carried a body that was low and wide and armored with overlapping plates that shimmered between dark green and black. Her head was broad and flat, with a jaw that could close around a person without effort. Bioluminescent lines ran along her spine in slow pulses of pale blue light. She was also hurt. A deep, ugly wound ran along her left side. The flesh burned and blackened in a way that Danny recognized. Plasma damage. Someone had shot her. The matriarch's eyes locked onto Danny. They were amber, enormous, and filled with something that was not mindless rage. Danny had grown up around animals his entire life. He had seen rage in the eyes of a bull. He had seen hunger in the eyes of a mountain lion. What he saw in the matriarch's eyes was something different. She was afraid. She was afraid for her cubs. Danny did not stand up. He did not reach for a weapon he did not have. He sat perfectly still with 4 cubs bundled against his chest and stomach, warm and quiet for the first time in what he guessed was hours, and he looked back at the matriarch without flinching. "It is okay," he said softly. "They are safe." She could not understand his words. He knew that, but tone carried further than language. He had talked down panic horses with nothing but his voice, standing in the dark at 3 in the morning with freezing rain on his back. This was different, but the principle was the same. Stay calm. Stay small. Let the mother see that her young are not in danger. The matriarch lowered her head. Her nostrils, each one wide enough for Danny to fit his fist inside, flared as she inhaled. She smelled the cubs first, their scent all over his jacket, his shirt, his hands. Then she smelled him. She exhaled a blast of hot air that ruffled his hair and scattered dust from the ground. Danny did not move. The smallest cub, the one that had been barely alive when Danny found it, stirred against his chest. It opened its mouth and made a tiny sound, not a distress call this time. Something softer, something that sounded absurdly like contentment. The matriarch heard it. Her massive body shifted, and then, with a slowness that seemed impossible for something her size, she lowered herself to the ground. Her legs folded beneath her. The earth groaned under her weight. She settled with her injured side facing upward, exposed, her head resting just 3 meters from Danny. She was not attacking. She was lying down beside him. Behind the roots, Raleigh made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Danny looked at the wound on the matriarch's flank. Up close, it was worse than he had thought. The plasma burn had cut deep into the muscle beneath her armor plates. The edges were swollen and hot with infection. Greenish fluid seeped from the center of the wound. Without treatment, it would kill her. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But soon he shifted the cubs gently, setting them down between his legs where they could still feel his warmth. Then he reached for his field kit, the standard-issue medical pouch every cadet carried for training exercises. It was designed for minor cuts, sprains, and allergic reactions. It was absolutely not designed for treating a creature the size of a building. Danny opened it anyway. He pulled out the antiseptic spray, the bonding gel, and the one roll of bioadhesive bandage that would cover maybe a tenth of the wound. It was not enough. It was not even close to enough. But it was what he had. He stood slowly. The matriarchs, I tracked him. He took one step, then another, until he was standing beside her flank, close enough to touch the armored plates. They were warm, almost hot, and vibrated faintly with each of her breaths. "This is going to sting," Danny said quietly. "I am sorry." He sprayed the antiseptic into the wound. The matriarch's body tensed. A growl rolled through her chest. Not aimed at Danny, just pain, raw and involuntary. Her claws dug into the ground. Danny stood his ground. He kept spraying until the wound was clean, then applied the bonding gel along the deepest parts of the cut. It was not real surgery. It was barely first aid. But the bleeding slowed, and the gel sealed the worst of the infection inside. He pressed the bioadhesive bandage over what he could cover and stepped back. The matriarch exhaled. The tension left her body. The cubs crawled from Danny's legs toward their mother, pressing against her belly. But two of them, the smallest one and one with a crooked front leg, turned back and climbed into Danny's lap instead. Raleigh finally spoke from behind the roots, her voice thin and cracked. "You have completely lost your mind." Danny looked down at the two cubs sleeping on his legs, then at the matriarch resting beside him, then at the jungle around them, dark and quiet now. "Yeah," he said, "maybe I have." 3 kilometers north, the extraction zone looked like someone had kicked an anthill. Shuttles sat with engines running. Cadets huddled in groups, and Instructor Golan paced back and forth with all 4 arms moving in different agitated directions. His communicator had not stopped buzzing since the retreat began, and now it was buzzing for a new reason entirely. Point 2 cadets had not returned. "Cadet Reeves is not responding," Golan said into the command channel. His voice was clipped and sharp. "Cadet Raleigh's signal is stationary beside his. Both are located 1.6 kilometers south, directly in the projected path of the Verati matriarch." The response came from Station Palora, from the operations deck where Commander Brith sat behind a curved console surrounded by holographic displays. Brith was Dalvari, tall gray, with a smooth insectoid face and compound eyes that never seemed to blink. He processed information the way a machine processes fuel, efficiently and without emotion. "Are they alive?" Brith asked. "Signals are active. Heart rates are elevated but stable." The matriarch, Golan, checked the scanner and felt his stomach drop. "She is stationary, at the same coordinates as the cadets." Silence on the channel. Then Brith spoke again. "Deploy the strike team. Full combat loadout. I want them on site in 15 minutes. Beside Brith, Weapons Officer Tenat leaned forward. He was Dalvari as well, younger, with a sharpness to his movements that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this kind of situation his entire career. "Commander, I recommend we authorize the heavy plasma cannon. One clean shot from high altitude. The matriarch is stationary. We can end this before it becomes a recovery mission." Brith considered it. "Approved on standby. Deploy the ground team first. If the cadets are still alive, I want them extracted." In the shuttle bay, Sir was standing near the loading ramp when the strike team began gearing up. 6 soldiers in heavy armor, carrying weapons designed to punch through starship hulls. He watched them check their targeting systems and load their magazines, and something about it did not sit right. Sir was Canary. His people respected strength and action. They did not waste time on feelings. But he had spent 5 months training beside Danny Reeves, and in that time he had learned one uncomfortable truth about the human. Danny did not do things without a reason. That he walked to the nearest comm panel and opened a channel. This is Cadet's sewer. The human cadet is not stupid. If he stopped running, there's a reason. Do not shoot until you understand what that reason is. The channel was silent for a moment. Then Tennant's voice came through, cold and dismissive. Noted, Cadet. Return to your shuttle. Sir did not return to his shuttle. Back in the jungle, Danny sat with his back against the root wall, 2 cubs in his lap, and a matriarch lying beside him like a living mountain. Night was falling on Vareth, and the bioluminescent lines on the matriarch's spine began to glow brighter, casting pale blue light across the clearing. Raleigh had moved closer. Not much. 5 meters instead of 10. She sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her fur still bristled, but her breathing had slowed. I am recording this, she said quietly. Danny looked at her. What? She held up her personal device. The small lens on the front glowed faintly. I have been recording since you sat down with the cubs. I do not know why. Someone should see this. Raleigh, if the Academy sees this, we will both be expelled. We will be expelled anyway. You turned off your communicator and refused a direct retreat order. I stayed with you. We are already finished. She paused. So I figured someone should at least see the truth. Danny did not argue. The smallest cub shifted in his lap, yawned with a mouth full of tiny teeth that would one day be able to crack metal, and pressed its face into Danny's stomach. Danny, Raleigh said carefully, why did you stay? He was quiet for a while. The matriarch breathed slowly beside him, each exhale warm enough to feel from a meter away. When I was 14, Danny said, a mountain lion came down from the hills near our ranch, killed 2 calves in one night. My father wanted to shoot it. I went up the next morning and found it in a cave. She had 3 kittens. She was starving because the drought had killed the deer. She was not evil. She was just trying to keep her babies alive. What did you do? I brought a deer carcass from the freezer and left it at the cave mouth. Did it every week for 2 months until the rains came back and the deer returned. She never came near the ranch again. Raleigh stared at him. Your species is absolutely terrifying. Danny almost laughed. We get that a lot. A sound cut through the jungle. Boots on wet ground, heavy and deliberate. The strike team was close. Danny could see flashlight beams cutting between the trees, and he heard the low hum of charged weapons that he stood up slowly. The cub stirred but did not wake. The matriarch opened one amber eye and watched him. Danny stepped forward, placing himself between the approaching lights and the creature behind him. He was unarmed, unarmored, covered in dirt and cub drool, and completely calm. The first soldier broke through the tree line and stopped dead. 6 weapons trained on the clearing. 6 soldiers stared at the impossible scene before them. Danny raised one hand, palm open. She is not a threat, he said clearly. She is a mother. Her cubs were dying and she was wounded. That is all this is. Nobody moved, nobody fired. The strike team leader was a Canary named Dren, built even wider than Sewer, with scars running across both sides of his jaw. He had served for 19 years and had never once hesitated to pull a trigger. He was hesitating now. His targeting display painted the matriarch in red. Threat level maximum. Every sensor on his suit screamed at him to fire. Every piece of training he had ever received told him that this creature was a killing machine, and the human standing in front of it was already dead. He just did not know it yet. But the human was not dead. The human was standing with his hand raised, looking at Dren with calm brown eyes, and behind him a Verati matriarch lay on the ground with 4 cubs tucked against her belly. 2 of the cubs were curled around the human's boots. Lower your weapons, Danny said. Cadet, step away from the creature, Dren replied. If you fire, she will react. Right now she is calm. Her cubs are safe and her wound is treated. If you do anything to threaten that, none of us walk out of this jungle. Dren's jaw tightened. He opened his comm channel to Station Palora. Command, I have visual on both cadets. They are alive and unharmed. The Verati matriarch is resting. She appears to be allowing the human to remain near her cubs. On the operations deck, Commander Brith stared at the drone feed. Tenat stood beside him, his hand hovering over the authorization panel for the plasma cannon. That is impossible, Tenat said. And yet, Brith replied quietly, there it is. Raleigh chose that moment to step out from behind the root wall. She walked forward on shaking legs until she stood beside Danny, holding her recording device above her head. "This has been streaming to the Academy internal network for the last 40 minutes, she said. Her voice was thin but steady. "Every cadet on Station Palora is watching." Drin looked at her, then at Danny, then at his squad. "Confirm that," he said into his comm. The confirmation came back in seconds. Rally's footage had gone from her personal device to the cadet network, and from there it had spread to every screen on the station. Thousands of beings were watching a human sit among Verati cubs while a matriarch rested beside him. The comment section, Drin was told, had crashed twice. On Station Palora, Sir stood in front of a wall screen in the common hall, surrounded by hundreds of cadets. The footage was shaky, poorly lit, and the most important thing any of them had ever seen. He pulled out his personal comm and contacted someone he had not spoken to in 2 years, Dr. Pavi, a Mirati xenobiologist who had been studying Verati migration patterns from orbital distance for 3 decades. When Pavi answered, Sir did not bother with greetings. "Doctor, I am sending you a live feed. Watch it." 30 seconds later, Dr. Pavi's voice came back, barely above a whisper. "That is not possible. Where did you get this?" "It is happening right now. The human cadet is on Verith, sitting with a Verati matriarch. He treated her wound. She is not attacked." Pavi was silent for 10 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking. "I have spent my entire career trying to observe Verati from 500 kilometers away. No one has been within 100 meters of a living matriarch and survived. The behavioral data from this single encounter is worth more than everything I have ever published." Sir said nothing. He simply kept the channel open so Pavi could watch. On Verith, the standoff continued. Drin and his squad held their positions, weapons lowered but not holstered. Danny had not moved. The matriarch had not moved. The cubs slept. Then Brith's voice came through the command channel, and for the first time since Danny had met him through briefing recordings, the commander sounded uncertain. "Strike team, hold position. Do not engage the Verati. New directive incoming from the Galactic Science Council." Tenet spun in his chair. "Commander, this is a Category 9 threat. Protocol requires me to use my judgment, Officer Tenet. And my judgment is telling me that firing a plasma cannon at a creature who is currently lying peacefully beside a cadet will be the worst decision I could make today." The Science Council's directive arrived 3 minutes later. It was short and direct. The Verati matriarch was not to be harmed, sedated, or disturbed. A research team was being dispatched immediately. The encounter was to be preserved as a first contact event. Danny did not hear any of this. He had sat back down among the cubs, and the matriarch had shifted her body closer. Her massive tail, thick and ridged with armored plates, curled slowly around the space where Danny sat, forming a protective ring that enclosed him and the cubs together. He was inside her guard. She had placed him there. Rally lowered her recording device and stared. Drin, 19 years of combat experience behind him, took one step back. The smallest cub woke up, crawled into Danny's lap, and began chewing on the zipper of his jacket. Danny scratched the soft spot behind its ears, and the cub made a sound that vibrated through its entire body. Doctor. Pavi's shuttle was already burning atmosphere toward Verith. When she arrived 4 hours later, flanked by 2 research assistants who looked like they might faint, she stepped into the clearing and saw Danny Reeves sitting cross-legged inside the curl of a Verati matriarch's tail, feeding nutrient paste to 4 cubs, while 6 armed soldiers stood in a loose circle looking completely lost. Pavi turned to Sur, who had come down on the same shuttle. "Humans," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "Every time we think we understand them, they do something like this." Sur crossed his arms and watched Danny scratch a cub behind the ears. "Yes," he said, "they do." 5 days passed on Verith, and the jungle clearing that had once been a hollow under a root system was now a research camp. Portable shelters ringed the perimeter. Sensor arrays hummed quietly in the trees. Dr. Pavi and her team moved through the camp with the careful, disbelieving energy of people who knew they were witnessing something that would rewrite textbooks. The matriarch had not left. She had shifted position twice, both times to better shield her cubs from the rain, but she stayed. The camp existed within her territory now, and she tolerated it for one reason only. Danny, he was the only person who could walk within 5 meters of her. When Pavi's assistant had tried to approach with a scanner, the matriarch had risen to her full height and released a sound so deep it rattled equipment off tables. Danny had stepped between them, put his hand on the matriarch's shoulder plate, and spoken to her in that same low, steady voice. She had settled back down. After that, no one tried again without Danny present. She communicates through subsonic vibrations, Pavi explained to Danny on the third morning, showing him readings on a portable display. Frequencies below what most species can detect. But humans? She tapped the screen. Your hearing range is limited, but your bodies can feel subsonic pulses. That hum you have been feeling in your chest since the first night. That is her. Danny pressed his hand to his sternum. He had noticed the hum. He had assumed it was stress. What is she saying? We're still decoding it. But from the patterns, it appears to be something like a proximity signal. She's telling you where she is and that she is calm. It is what Verati mothers use with their young. Danny looked at the matriarch. She was watching him with one half-open amber eye. She thinks I am one of her cubs? Not exactly. We believe she has categorized you as a caretaker, someone who protects the young. In Verati's social structure, that is a role of very high status. Pavi paused. Higher than the matriarch herself, in some contexts. Danny did not know what to do with that information, so he went back to feeding the cubs. The cubs were growing fast. In 5 days, they had nearly doubled in size. Their armor plates were hardening, their movements were quicker, and their personalities were emerging. The 2 larger cubs stayed close to their mother. The one with the crooked front leg explored constantly, poking into every corner of the camp. And the smallest one, the one Danny had picked up first, the one that had been barely alive, followed Danny everywhere. Raleigh visited every afternoon, bringing supplies from the station and news from the academy. She had become a minor celebrity. Her footage had spread beyond the Cadet network to the Galactic Union's public channels. Billions of beings across dozens of worlds had watched a human sit among Verati cubs. The Academy board is split, she told Danny on the 4th day, sitting on a supply crate while the smallest cub chewed on her boot. She had stopped being afraid of the cubs on day 2. She was still terrified of the matriarch. Half of them want to give you a commendation for unprecedented interspecies contact. The other half want to court-martial you for disobeying a direct order during a threat emergency. Which half is bigger? It changes by the hour. Sir arrived at the camp on day 5. He walked in without announcement, looked around at the research equipment, the shelters, the matriarch sleeping in the center of it all, and sat down beside Danny. The board will not court-martial you, Sir said. How do you know? Because I told Commander Brith that if they punished you for saving lives, every Canary cadet would withdraw from the academy in protest. Brith knows we mean it. Danny stared at him. Sir had never said more than 6 words to him in a single conversation before. Thank you, Sir. Do not thank me. Just do not get eaten. That evening, Commander Brith came to Verith. He arrived without escort, wearing his standard uniform instead of combat gear. Danny watched him walk into the clearing and stopped 20 meters from the matriarch, who raised her head and watched him with those amber eyes. Brith did not come closer. He stood where he was and observed. Danny feeding the cubs. The matriarch allowing Danny to check her wound, which was healing well. The smallest cub falling asleep on Danny's shoulder. After 30 minutes, Brith walked to where Danny sat and spoke quietly. How did you know she would not kill you? Danny gave the same answer he always gave because it was the only honest one. I did not. I just knew the cubs were dying. I cannot walk away from that. In 200 years of Galactic Union history, the standard response to a Verati encounter has been lethal force. Every time, the survival rate for anyone who remained near a Verati was 0%. Danny looked up at the matriarch, who had closed her eyes and was humming, that deep, subsonic pulse that Danny felt in his bones. Maybe that is because nobody ever tried sitting down, Danny said. Brith was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded once and walked back to his shuttle. The next morning, Pavi burst into the camp with a look on her face that Danny had never seen before. She was holding a transmission pad, her hands shaking. The Galactic Union just received a formal communication from the Virati homeworld, she said. Her voice cracked. For the first time in recorded history, the Virati species is requesting diplomatic contact. Danny set down the cub he was holding. That is good, right? Pavi looked at him. They have one condition. They will only speak with a human. The Galactic Council chamber on Station Palora was shaped like a bowl, with curved rows of seats rising in every direction around a central platform. 412 delegates from over 100 species filled those seats. Translators hummed in dozens of frequencies. Camera drones floated near the ceiling, broadcasting to billions across known space. Danny Reeves stood on the central platform in his cadet uniform, which Raleigh had washed and pressed that morning because Danny had forgotten. He looked out at 400 alien faces and felt like he was about to throw up. That he was not a diplomat. He was not a soldier. He was a 22-year-old kid from a cattle ranch in Montana who had joined the Galactic Union Academy because he wanted to see what was past the sky. 9 months ago, his biggest worry had been passing his navigation exam. Now he was standing in front of the entire galaxy. Commander Briss spoke first, laying out the facts. A Virati matriarch had been injured by a Union-licensed poacher. Her cubs had been left vulnerable. A human cadet had found them and chosen to stay. The matriarch had not attacked. First contact had been achieved, not through diplomacy, not through military strength, but through an act of simple care. Then Brith turned to Danny and asked him to speak. Danny gripped the edges of the podium. He had written nothing. He had prepared nothing. Every advisor who had spoken to him in the last 2 days had urged him to craft a message of historic weight, something worthy of the moment. Danny had nodded and then ignored all of them. I found 4 cubs in a hole under a tree, Danny said. They were cold and scared, and one of them was dying. So I picked them up. Their mother came, and she was hurt, so I cleaned her wound. That is what happened. That is all that happened. He paused. The chamber was silent. I know the records say Virati are monsters. I know the survival rate for encounters was 0. But I grew up around animals, and I know what fear looks like. The matriarch was not hunting. She was trying to get back to her babies. And when she saw that someone was keeping them warm instead of running away, she lay down beside me and let me help. Danny looked across the rows of alien faces, insectoid, reptilian, furred, scaled, shapes he still did not have names for. I think maybe the problem was never that the Virati were dangerous. I think the problem was that nobody ever gave them a reason not to be. He stepped back from the podium. That was it. No grand declaration. No historic proclamation. A ranch kid telling the truth. The Virati delegate spoke next. She entered the chamber through a reinforced door that had been widened specifically for this occasion. She was even larger than the matriarch Danny had helped. Broader, older, her armor plates layered with patterns that Pavi had said represented age and rank. A translation device was strapped to her chest, converting her subsonic vibrations into spoken language for the first time. The translated voice was deep and slow and carried a weight that made the walls hum. We have watched your union for 10,000 years, since before your oldest species reached the stars. We watched you discover us, and we watched you decide we were beasts. Every ship you sent carried weapons. Every team you deployed fired first. We learned what you believed us to be, and we retreated to protect our own. The delegate paused. The chamber did not breathe. This human did what none of you considered. He found our young in distress, and he chose to help. He saw our wounded, and he chose to heal. He was given every reason to run, and he sat down. Her amber eyes, ancient and vast, found Danny in the crowd. We have waited 10,000 years for someone to sit down. We will not wait again. The treaty was proposed that afternoon. Full diplomatic recognition of the Virati as a sentient civilization. An immediate ban on hunting or trapping in Virati territories. And a new position created within the Galactic Union structure, liaison to the Virati territories. The position was offered to Danny. He accepted, mostly because he did not know how to say no to something that important, and partly because the smallest cub had somehow been smuggled on a station Palora by Raleigh and was currently asleep under his bunk. Raleigh volunteered for his team before he even asked. Sur took longer. He stood in the doorway of Danny's quarters for a full minute, arms crossed, saying nothing. "You're going to need someone who can actually fight," Sir said finally. "Is that a yes?" "It is not a no." Instructor Golan found Danny in the corridor the day before departure. The old Miradi stood stiffly, all four arms clasped behind his back, and for the first time Danny saw something other than authority on his face. "I was trained to fear the Virati," Golan said. "I taught that fear to every cadet who passed through my drills. You show me that I was wrong. I do not say that easily." Danny nodded. "Thank you, sir." Golan paused, then added, "Try not to adopt anything else." Danny made no promises that on the last day. He returned to Verith. The matriarch was waiting in the clearing with her cubs, who were now nearly waist-high and growing fast. The smallest one saw Danny step off the shuttle and bounded toward him with enough force to knock him flat on his back. It stood on his chest, vibrating with that deep hum, and pressed its face into his neck. Danny laughed, wrapped his arms around it, and sat up in the dirt. The matriarch watched him with those amber eyes, calm, knowing, patient. She hummed, and Danny felt it in his chest, in his ribs, in his heart. He sat among them, just like the first time. And somewhere in the council archives, the Virati delegates' words were recorded for every species, every world, every generation to come. "You call yourselves civilized, yet you shoot first and grieve later." This human did what none of you ever considered. He sat down. He stayed. And that changed everything.